I think you should aim to automate the low-skilled, undifferentiated, unspecialized part of the jobs. I think there are some startups and some people trying to automate that other piece, and I think it's probably a losing proposition, at least at the time being. Who knows?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I
maybe in a
agree.
few years. But people want to still do that. Like I still think most people want to do the creative, generative, high-skilled work that they feel excites them, intellectually energizes them. They feel like they're special and they can only do. I think people still want to do that. I don't think they want to do this other stuff.
Today's successful revenue leaders once started their careers just like you and I. They faced the challenges that their careers brought to them, they rose to the occasion, and became the leaders that we admire today. Join me as we explore the skills and stories that make a great leader with a pinch of vulnerability. Hello and welcome to Sales Therapy. I'm your host, Alper Yurder. Grab a chair. This is your exclusive invitation to the therapy room, as leaders are going to be sharing their career-defining moments, their secret tips and tricks in their arsenal towards success. And I promise we'll always end on a positive note. So today in the therapy chair, we have Jeff Whitlock, who's the founder and CEO of Grain. We'll talk about his success, the joy, the pain, and the journey. So welcome to Sales Therapy. How are you feeling today, Jeff?
Good. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. You're one of those founders that I follow with great joy and excitement. You bring fresh perspectives. You share the highs and the lows, and you really share your observations, like data-driven insights, very candidly. So I think we're gonna have a good chat today on the show, hopefully. But before we talk any business at all, obviously this is sales therapy, and any good therapy starts with childhood and growing up years because it shapes the person we are today as a person at work, as a person at business. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, where did you grow up? How was the growing up experience for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Utah and Arizona. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, which
Oh, wow.
has a lot of probably a lot to do with kind of who I am. And I grew up in a rural community on like an acre and a half, and spent a lot of time hanging out with the animals, traveling, camping, and working on the property.
This is a little bit of a shock to me because it's not our first encounter, and we've had some really great chats. See, this is why I asked the question. You never strike me as the type who grew up in a farm with seven, like between seven siblings. You strike me as the, I don't know, like the guy who grew up in urban New York or whatever. I don't know why I have that impression of you, Jeff.
Interesting. Yeah, no, definitely not urban. We were in rural Gilbert, Arizona. We had like goats, chickens, pigs, bunch of an orchard, and yeah, no,
Tell
like
me
kind of
now, do you miss it? Do you miss the pigs and
yeah,
chickens?
yeah, to some degree. I mean, I don't miss the work every Saturday. I mean, it's a lot. It
No.
was a lot of work. Yeah, my parents, in hindsight, like it's really grateful for them to kind of do it, but it was tough. Yeah, it was like every Saturday we did a lot of work to kind of maintain the thing. So
Tell me about it if you don't mind a little bit. Like, I have never grown up in a farm, a rural area, whatever. Like, all those things are new to me. I'm an urban. I'm an Istanbulite from the big city. So tell me the life of a farmer boy.
well, it's not necessarily a farm. It's like, I mean, there's big farms. We just had sort of like like more of an agrarian property and agrarian community. So it's like, so yeah, it's like we spent time, like I said, we had an orchard, so you constantly trimming the trees, picking the fruit. We probably had like 45 trees, 50 trees, something like that. And then,
What trees?
orange trees, yeah, navel oranges,
Uh,
yeah, in Arizona. They say in Arizona there's 5 C's, and citrus is one of them. It's actually a great place for growing citrus. But anyway, so then, and then spend time, a lot of time like pulling weeds, mowing lawns. The worst is leveling, because like my family was really cheap, so we didn't have a tractor. So like you get like the property can
oh
get like
shit!
really like rocky and bumpy, and so you use shovels to level it to like make it flat. It's
Oh
just like,
no!
yeah, get calluses. So it's good, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
good stuff. Yeah.
So they made the seven kids just like good old days for the labor, basically.
I mean, it wasn't like cruel or anything. It was like, it was like 4 hours every Saturday, 4 or 5 hours every Saturday, and then after we're
Okay,
done, we could
okay,
go play. But
okay.
I think my parents did it really deliberately. Like they wanted us to learn the value of hard work.
Now comparing the work back then to the work you do as a founder, like which is nonstop, and this is not your first rodeo. Which one do you pick? I guess your current life. I
I mean,
guess.
that's why I'm a founder. It's easier. I mean, in some ways, honestly, that is kind of the thing that's nice, is like, so I had that experience as a child, and then during college, I worked in construction. I was a construction worker,
Oh
and like
wow.
those two experiences, I'm always, I like will occasionally pause and reflect on those and like, hey, I like what I'm doing. As frustrating as it is at times, it's like I like this a lot better. This is a way better
Mm.
gig than so gives me that appreciation and
I
perspective.
think it's such a funny thing. Like, I mean, obviously, I've been a university and hard worker and white collar and all that. It's just office work. You don't do anything like manual, like proper human job. And
Yeah.
I just so great. So you grew up and then like high school, university. Like, how did you? When did you start moving away from that family house?
Yeah, so I went I moved to California for university.
Oh
Um,
no.
and then yeah, I went to this school called Occidental, which is like this like liberal arts college. Its claim to fame is that Obama went there for a couple years before transferring to Columbia, so that was fun.
Mm,
And then I went there. I played football and studied music composition, and then I then I actually left the country for 2 years. In my faith tradition, we do this thing called a mission, where
mm.
you like go and you spend 2 years in another country. So I did that, and I served in West Africa. So I was in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and then I came back and I transferred to Brigham Young University, which is a university in Utah, where I finished my undergraduate degree.
How was the mission experience? Was it humbling?
There's a lot of things, honestly, like humbling, perspective expanding, life changing. Lots of words you could use, but yeah, it was amazing. I traveled to Mexico a couple times growing up, but hadn't really been exposed to a very different culture with I would say with
Different.
basically a lot of poverty, like
Oh yeah.
lots of poverty and poor
Mm,
infrastructure. And yeah, and it was amazing just to spend a lot of time with people from there and get to learn to love them and
mhm.
become brothers and sisters with them, but also just see a lot of things they could teach me, and that we're all still humans despite all the differences.
Yeah. No, I love that. Wow. That's a great experience. I guess in the States, and a lot of my guests are from the States, obviously, it's a very, how should I say, supposedly it's a multicultural culture, it's a pluralist society and all that,
Yeah,
but at the same time, it does feel quite conservative and like inner looking. So I guess
yeah,
getting out of Arizona, Utah, whatever, and going to those places, it must have been, and you were young, it must have been quite an interesting experience for you. Like, these people are quite different from me, but then you start figuring out the similarities, I guess.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I think this happens a lot when you go into new environments. Is you're as a species, we evolved to like look for threats,
Yeah,
and we're attenuated to differences in our environment in case it is a threat. And so when you go to a new place, you're very focused on like all the differences, and that's why people have culture shock. But then once you get past that, you see, oh wow, humans are actually really similar wherever you go. I really believe we all are way more similar than we're different. We have very similar needs, desires,
yeah,
values, and so yeah,
yeah.
that was a great experience
All
in
right.
that regard.
Coming into your formative years a little bit, what did you mentioned liberal arts you studied?
Yeah, so my first university was a liberal arts university, and so just like I said, my major was technically music composition, but took a lot of different classes, very interesting classes. Like we took this class called the Liberation of Sound, which was all about getting sound out of like basically that music is sort of like constrained in just like tone like Western tonalities, and so it's all
Mm.
about listening to very like music that uses different note structures and completely different scales. That was interesting, and just a lot of different
What
like
and how it moves the human psyche, or like how the different sounds give us
it
different.
wasn't so much psychological. It was just a music class, but about just like
Mm.
how
Okay, fine.
how different. Yeah,
Nothing
but yeah,
fancy.
just took a lot of it. Yeah, it wasn't that fancy, but it was interesting. It was good. And then I mean, we took classes about like California history and just this really interesting class about just like basically just like I mean now it's like really really popular to deconstruct things, but like back
Mm.
when I was a little like a kid coming from rural Arizona, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like just kind of deconstructing a lot of things, like my understanding of history and society and some core beliefs and stuff. But it was good. It was good to get exposed to that. But I ultimately transferred schools to a very different school, which was not a liberal arts, but which was BYU, which is a more traditional university, somewhat of a conservative university because it's affiliated with our faith, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints. Still had a great experience there. I studied economics, but it was much more like of a practical education, less of like a mind blowing, let's question everything, deconstruct everything
Mm,
education.
okay.
Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
So I got
Well,
exposure to little both styles.
a little bit going deep is fine, but let's not go that deep. Okay, I get it. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Did you like from there? How did you end up being the founder that we know you as, the persona, the startup founder persona that you are now? And this is not your first rodeo. Like how did events take you to that direction?
Yeah, so I went to I went to McKinsey and Company for a couple years doing just management consulting. Had a really interesting experience there. I worked on a variety of different projects. So I did like mining, manufacturing, strategy, just all sorts of random stuff. It's
How
really
long you
fun.
spent at McKinsey?
2 years. Yeah, so just a
Oh,
couple
okay,
years.
great. So it
Yeah.
didn't destroy you too much. Good. That's good.
No, I think it was good. I think
I spent
I
6 years
definitely
in
think that
consulting.
you did.
I
Oh,
did,
so it did
yeah.
destroy you. My goodness. No, just kidding.
I was already
No,
destroyed previously, but even
that's
more
funny.
interesting.
That's funny. Yeah, I liked consulting. It was really great, but I got out of it pretty quickly, and then I did product management for a couple years. Then I joined a startup as like an early employee. I don't remember, like employee number 4 or 5, and then as a head of product. And so I ran product at a startup, and this was in Uganda. So this was I went back to Africa, which was really cool. Me and my wife moved there, and
Nice.
we were working we were working on this company called Safeboat, which is like a motorcycle taxi company. So sort of like Uber for motorcycle taxis in
Mm.
Africa. And that was a really awesome experience. Did that until my wife had our first child. We got pregnant. She got pregnant in Africa and then carried our baby to term. And then we decided to kind of come back to the States to be closer to family.
Mm.
And then that, so I kind of just back, this was like pre-remote work. I sometimes wonder, like, if things had happened a few years later, if I would have stayed with that startup. But back then
Mm.
they were like a fully, co-located company in Uganda. So I had to leave because I had to move. And so that I was already like, wow, I love startups. Like, this was such a great experience. I don't really want to go find another corporate job. So let me just try to explore. So I kind of helped my friend out with his startup for about 6 months, maybe closer, like between 6 to 9 months. It was under the like agreement that I wasn't like fully joining to kind of for the full ride, but I was just kind of like helping him while I explored. And in that experience, I kind of found an idea and a team that I wanted to work with, and started on that. That was my first startup, called Unbird. But yeah, I'll pause there. I've been talking for a while.
So those were all B2C, right? Back then.
Yeah, no, my first startup Unbird was actually B2B, but the first, but
Mm. The tax one.
the first two, my product management experience was B2C, and then my
Mm.
the ride sharing startup was B2C also. Yeah.
Mm. See, I never did anything B2C in my life. I mean, the closest that I got was B2B2C. How does that
Mm.
experience compare to what you're doing now or for the past few years?
I don't see them as being that different personally. I mean, they're different from like a strategy lens. I think there's a lot, and go to market. I think go to market and strategy and sales is obviously very different. From a product perspective, they're very similar. And I've always tried to actually bring a B2C
Mm.
lens to my product management, my product leadership,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
because I feel like at the end of the day, you should treat your end users as consumers, and they need a good premium experience. And
completely
I
agree with
think
that.
that's
Yeah,
more common now than it used to be. I think it used to
yeah.
be a bit, there used to be a lot of bad B2B software out there, and there still is. Like, has anyone opened up Salesforce? I mean, that's terrible. Um, I mean, so bad. It's just terrible. Like, no
just,
one loves
just
their
a little in parenthesis. I love how you took a little dig at this giant.
anyway, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not great. Yes, let's say that.
So yeah, so I took so that's the product I think product is very similar. It's all about still fundamentally understanding their needs, their preferences, delivering great experiences that solves the problems. From a distribution perspective, it's very obviously very different. Buying behavior is very different. Usually in B2C, you just have a single buyer who makes the decision,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's more of an impulse buy or an emotional buy. Whereas that being said, I will say my two B2C experiences they were basically like SaaS in many ways. Like,
Hmm?
I worked at this place called Vivint, which was a smart home company. So basically they would buy like different pieces of equipment, and then they would pay for upgrades for like monitoring and video recording. So it was a recurring business. But still, it's like a lot of times they'll that initial purchasing decision is usually just driven by one person. It's like I said, sometimes it's less like, not to say you don't try to deliver value, but a lot of times it's more you're trying to speak, like, the jobs framework says there's like functional and emotional jobs. And I
Yeah.
feel like I feel like consumers a bit more on the emotional side than just functional. It's like maybe 80-20 or 70-60-40, whereas like it kind of flips in B2B. That being said, I still think something that a lot of
I would
B2B
definitely
founders.
challenge you on that. I would definitely challenge you on that, and it's. I think it will be a juicy topic to challenge you on that. But I think you were
Well,
just going
there
to
might not be
allude
that much.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's less disagreement. I was going to say I think a lot of people don't consider emotional jobs as much as they should in B2B. I think
Yeah,
it's
it
too
is.
functional a lot of times.
I
Yeah.
mean, like when the B2B buyer, for me, I guess in the past decade of like selling B2B and stuff, there's always like a driving emotion. Like there's a fear, there's an anxiety,
Yeah. No, it's true.
there's like
Yeah.
there's a bit of an enthusiasm. I think fear is a very. Somebody told me, one of my very early sales coaches, I think, and I forgot the second one, but he told me human behavior is driven generally by two emotions. Like one is fear, and the other one, it's something around enthusiasm. I forgot the exact thing,
Okay.
but it's more
That
joyful
sounds like
than
a lot of
fear.
wisdom. You gotta remember the second one. But I think I
I
agree.
know.
If fear
But
is
I
fear
agree
is
with fear because I used to be a very fear driven individual in a lot of my decisions. So that resonates a lot with
mm,
me, like risk averse. And a lot of buyers,
yeah.
when they're buying, especially like big deals, average ticket size high, it's a lot of fear.
Yeah, no, totally. I think you're totally right. I think at the end of the day, we're human. Going back to saying about we're all humans. I still think though there is a more. It obviously depends on where you're selling the market, but there's a lot. There still are other. Maybe your main champion is a lot of times driven by emotion, but you still need to sort of like check functional boxes or an
Of course.
ROI
Yeah.
from other parties. So
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta make a beautiful mutual action plan and have all your stakeholders aligned on the shameless plug, which I never do. Maybe I should start doing like every 5 minutes a shameless plug of Flowline into these podcast
yeah,
episodes.
there you go.
So I want to talk a little bit about the founder experience now that you started mentioning already your current experience there. But it's not your first rodeo. So how did you become an entrepreneur? How did you start your first business? And walk us through maybe briefly through the different things.
Yeah, so I mentioned how when I came back from this startup in Africa that I joined as an early employee,
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to do a business. So I kind of hooked up with an existing founding team. They were just very early stages, uh, and it was an idea that like I had actually been playing with, and they were actually working on the same time. So we're like, hey, let's work together. That was Unbird, and that business was great. Really a lot of fun. It was essentially like it was a basically it's interesting. It would have been a different business today with LLMs, but it was essentially like the idea was that we connected to a lot of different data sources, and we
Mm-hmm.
sold to product leaders to help them understand the trends in their qualitative data. So
Mm-hmm.
we called at the time we called it like feedback analytics or qualitative analytics. So you had like quantitative product analytics, but then we called it qualitative
Yeah.
product analytics. And so yeah, I mean, it was a cool product, and we got some good early traction. It ultimately we went through Techstars with it, which was a lot of fun, but ultimately just had some initial founding team issues. Like we never really
Mm-hmm.
could get a founding team to really cohere, deliver at what was needed. It's hard to say. Sometimes I wonder like if we had just kind of stayed with that idea and then wrote it into the LLM wave. Like, but I don't know. I don't really love that market, to be honest. So I'm not heartbroken over the fact that it ended up having to stop. So that was the first startup, and then some of that team from that first startup, we actually honestly didn't even like fully shut down the company. It was just sort of some of the founders left, and then we uh, kind of just took the existing funding and company and rolled it into the next business we did, which was called Ping Pong. That was a video messaging app. It was actually pre-pandemic. We had Unbird was a
Oh
remote
wow.
team. We had people
Mm-hmm.
in Europe, Africa, and then US. And we just felt like the tools, like the collaborative tools, weren't really geared for that type of team structure at the time. And so we built like an asynchronous video messaging app. So it's kind of like Loom, but more like a messenger.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was really cool. Like you could basically just like have these like asynchronous threaded conversations using screen share and video and voice. And it was a really cool product, and it got a lot of initial traction. Some people really liked it, but then the pandemic hit, and then it got even more traction. But eventually, you know, the incumbents started focusing on remote work. And so they built a lot of this, like Slack built like their voice
Mm-hmm.
note. I don't know if you remember, but pre-pandemic, you couldn't even share a voice message through Slack. So they built their voice notes. They built their video, like where you can share like the video clips. They built like a lot of the the huddle feature. So they built a lot of these sort of remote work features into
Mhm.
their thing, which really just basically killed their momentum overnight. It was very
Mm.
interesting. And that experience taught me a lot about strategy.
Yeah, I was gonna say
And
when it killed the buzz, how did you guys feel? And was it like a atomic bomb dropped in the middle, or how did that feel? Was it a gradual? You're seeing the
um,
momentum dying, or?
it was a gradual seeing the momentum dying where it was like before you could
Mm,
kind of feel a little bit of pull. It kind of felt
mm,
like there's less pull and we're kind of pushing a bit. And then it's like, oh, even
mm,
if we're pushing, it's not happening. And
mm.
then it was, and the thing is that's interesting is like, it's funny how you tell yourself as a founder, like, and I know this is supposed to be about sales, so we probably salespeople do it too. It's like you tell yourself like just so stories, like like because you're always so you're committed on this course of action, so you tell yourself stories to sort of like make you feel comfortable about your course of action instead of really stepping back and being honest about the truth that you're in. So
See,
we
that's
would
so
tell it. We
funny.
told
I'm the exact opposite. That's the thing. And by
interesting.
the way, it's not about sales. It's about founders. It's about everything. It's about you.
Yeah,
So don't worry about
yeah,
like having
yeah.
to. But that topic that when you mention, oh, you do that. I'm the complete opposite. Like between us
Interesting.
as the founding team, I am always the skeptical one, the pessimist one, the the
That's
the
good.
realist one. Yeah, but that makes you the founder that you are, and I definitely want to talk about. Sorry, I cut you there, but I was very excited about because
That's good.
when you say those things, it's a very founder trait to have. It's a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
founder mentality. Fake it till you make it. Positivity because you're basically making a dream happen. So you have to have that kind of mindset.
Right. Yeah, to some degree for sure. But you can also waste time if you don't. So yeah, it's a tricky balance. It's really
It's a
interesting.
very tricky balance.
Yeah, so like we saw this kind of coming, like we saw Slack start to message remote working first, and then we're like, oh well, maybe they're just messaging it. They're not going to build it. And then we saw them drop like their first feature, which I think was huddles. And then we're
Mm,
like, well, for X, Y, and Z reason, it won't be a video first experience and it won't be fully integrated and it's going to be clunky. And it was all those things, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter because like Slack had the distribution and the network effects, and
yeah,
it's a multiplayer product. It's really hard to displace a multiplayer product
yeah.
with network effects. It's almost impossible.
Okay. What was your role in that founding team?
I was a CEO.
You were the CEO again. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Look, yeah, I've done my
yeah.
research. Sorry, I somehow I
No,
missed
it's
that.
fine. It's fine. So then what's interesting is then, so we kind of realized these things, but we still had raised a fair amount of money coming out of Y Combinator. We went through Y Combinator with this business.
Hmm.
And so we started looking at a pivot, and we explored a bunch of different like hard pivots because we like, once we realized like, hey, this business is going to work, we wanted to kind of like keep the kernel of what we built. Like we didn't want to scrap everything. And so we like looked at
Mm,
different adjacent businesses. Like for example, like we were like, oh, maybe there's coaching, like asynchronous video coaching. Like, could we sell to coaches, like sort of micro coaches who have their own little like group of people? And we looked at a bunch of things and I couldn't get conviction. Everything felt like we were just trying to force a solution into a problem rather than starting with a problem. So
mm,
we kind of like stepped way back and we're like, hey, we just need to pivot, and so let's run a very deliberate process to pick a better business, a better market. And we found one that we liked, but as we kind of going down it, we're like, man, this is going to be another year of building before we can like that. We found a problem in a market that we actually really liked, and I still think it's a pretty good problem market, but like the MVP needs were just really high, and we are like, man, this is going to be a
mm,
year of building, and we were already sort of a year and a half into building this other business. And so so around that time when we were kind of like wavering on whether or not to jump in with 2 feet into this pivot, we that's actually where the I was friends with the founder of Grain, and so we actually decided to merge with Grain. So what's
mm.
really interesting about my startup journey is like, and for better or for worse, it's sort of like just one thing is always sort of molded into the next. It hasn't never
Yeah,
been like
sounds
I
like.
completely failed, shut it down, start over. It's all kind of just been like one journey. So it's been interesting.
So, although you are an entrepreneur and a risk taker, I guess you like a bit of safety at the same time. Like, it's not like full plunges, or maybe I'm misjudging. I don't know.
No, I think that's fair to say. I think, it's an interesting question. Like I've kind of always just had this like, call it like heuristic or foundational belief of like, I'm just
Yeah,
going to move forward, like march forward with the next
nice.
most available option. I don't know if that's the right approach.
No,
Maybe it
it
would have been
sounds
better
like
just to,
survival strategy during Armageddon or something. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna continue to survive like a cockroach a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I think in hindsight, it might have been better to just fail outright and start over. But at the same time, I'm happy where I'm at. Like Grain's going great. It's an awesome product, and
Yeah, let's come to
so
that. I mean, it's going
yeah,
pretty well. It's a very crowded market you guys are in, just like I
yeah,
guess us,
yeah.
maybe even worse than us. Oh,
It
let's
probably is
and we
worse
talk.
if I had to say.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Let's fair
I think
enough.
it's more crowded. I think it is.
I know that you talk about that too. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, why do you feel it's too crowded? Let's start from there. Isn't the pie big enough for everyone?
Well, I mean, I don't know if too crowded is the right word, but it's definitely crowded.
Mm.
I feel like if we were better able to differentiate, or if we were in a, had fewer competitors, we'd be growing more. Like we're growing fine, but I feel like we would definitely be growing more. My kind of mental model, I don't know if this is right. Obviously, it's very complex, messy reality, but my mental model is like in any space, there's like the early adopters, right? You know that whole like there's like the early
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
adopters, and then like there's the innovators, early adopters,
Thank God for
early
them.
majority, late
Thank God
majority.
for the
Yeah,
early adapters because I'm
I
definitely
love
not one
early
of them, and I
adopters. I
appreciate
love
them
them
a
so
lot.
much
I
with all
love
my
them
heart.
too.
They play a very important role. They move society forward. Early adopters, man.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have startups without them. So, but
Yeah.
anyway, like I think that early adopter group is a lot smaller than the the early majority and late majority. And so if you have a lot of startups kind of going after those same early adopters, it definitely just kind of can slow things down for everyone, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
in our space specifically, I mean, the reality is it's kind of an obvious, like Peter Thiel talks about finding secrets. I don't think Grain
Mhm.
is a secret. It's just super obvious, like that, hey, business went on calls. There's a lot of value happening in these live calls. We should be recording them. Now that we're recording them, oh my gosh, there's AI that we can transcribe and use AI to do automate things with this data and get automatic insights. And so it's kind of obvious. And so I think the fact that it's obvious, it's like it's a weird combo of like super valuable, but also very obvious. So
Yeah.
and so I think that combination has kind of given
It's
us
still,
has made the market really crowded.
it might be obvious, but it's still very valuable, and I don't know if anybody is cracking it. Like, there's a few tools which I like. Sometimes I'm going into calls and I have like five of them, and people are like, "What the hell is going on?" But I like the
Yeah.
innovation that everyone's bringing, like all the automation and how sometimes I envision it to be kind of at like a vertical integration with Flowla. Everybody just loves automation, and actually, let's cut the crap. It's not automation what people love. People just love being lazy. They don't want to do anything. You know, they just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, I don't know if it's laziness or
I think it's people don't want to do boring things, right? It's like I think
exactly better way.
a lot of jobs have a lot of boring crap to do. Like,
Mm,
like for salespeople, for example, it's like it's actually fun, I think. I love talking to a prospect and figuring out what their needs are and trying to solve those needs. I don't love updating my CRM afterwards and
mm,
going through my task and sending follow-up emails and like just all like the sort of admin work of sales. Like it's not that fun. It's boring, and
mm.
most people can
Yeah,
do it. So it's a combination of like boring and not that like not using like people's creativity and their in the the tip of their skills that only few people can do. It's sort of like a lot of jobs. It's funny because like if you have you ever read Cal Newport a lot? Are you familiar with him? He wrote like
mm.
Deep Work and a couple other books. Anyway,
No.
he makes this really interesting point where he sort of says like a lot of knowledge work is like before knowledge work, like labor used to be divided into a lot of different pieces where it's like if you're building like a car on an assembly line, you'd have like the people who did the tires, and you'd have the people who
Hmm.
did the steering, and the people who did the engine, and there was like very highly specialized labor. But the interesting thing about knowledge work is like it's very unspecialized. Like people will typically have like one
Yeah.
piece of their job that's specialized, and then they do a lot of stuff that's unspecialized, like sending emails, following up, scheduling appointments. Like there's so much garbage that's very not unspecialized and not high skilled, to be honest. Whereas like 20% of their job is high skilled. And so
Yeah.
that's what I see as the cool thing about AI is like allowing people to spend more of their time on the high skilled part of their job and less on this like low skilled sort of unspecialized part of their job.
Is that how you define also automation? 'Cause we everybody throws the word automation here and there, but with your tool, with your life, with the way you build the product, how do you define automation?
Yeah, I think so. I think you should aim to automate the low skilled, undifferentiated, unspecialized part of the jobs. I think there are some startups and some people trying to automate the that other piece, and I think it's probably a losing proposition, at least at the time being. Who
Yeah.
knows? Like
Yeah. I
maybe in a
agree.
few years, but people want to still do that. Like I still think most people want to do the creative, generative, high skilled work that they feel, you know, excites them, intellectually energizes them. They feel like they're special and they can only do. I think people still want to do that. I don't think they want to do this other stuff.
I think you very clearly and very simply explained this AI and automation and whatever dilemma, which is nobody wants to do the boring, repetitive, low skill stuff, but people still enjoy the highly intellectual, stimulating, etc.
Yeah.
That's leave that to humans, maybe at the moment at least. I
At the
like that
moment, we'll see
definition. I'll
what.
steal it.
Yeah, yeah. There we
I'll
go.
steal it.
Please do, please do.
Okay. So you mentioned already like what you like or not like about sales a little bit, but very like scratching the surface. Who's leading the sales effort at Grain at the moment? Is it you or is it somebody you brought into the team?
It was me up until 2 months ago.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
I was
good
leading
for
the sales
you.
effort. Yeah, I'm still involved. I still will do a couple sales calls a week. I think it's very important as a founder to still be
Critical.
involved. Yeah, critical, very important data source. So I'm still involved. I still do sales, but we hired a COO who leads our sales.
A COO?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, obviously, you know, the interesting thing about startups is you know,
Multiple
I don't
heads.
know. So that was the title. I mean, we could have called him chief revenue, but he's also doing some other things. Like he's also leading success, and so
Okay.
so he leads sort of like sales and success and a couple other like small operational areas. Yeah,
I mean, call them whatever you want. I guess they're just spearheading the whole thing. But
yeah,
yeah, it's an elephant in the room. If I don't address the your sales is being left by a chief operating officer, I think that's quite unheard of. But then, what does the COO does is your business. How did you
yeah.
decide to hand
I mean,
over
part of that
your?
is
Hmm.
I would say part of that is because Grain is a product led company primarily, and the majority of our business comes through people signing up using Grain and then running a credit card, and so our motion is
Hmm.
more of like a sales assist motion, not like it's not the core like driver.
Yeah.
It's like jet
Yeah.
fuel or augmentation. So
Yeah.
maybe that's why it's
Yeah.
maybe with that context it's a little less odd.
You gave me something else to build on. The thing is, my challenge, guys, with this podcast, and I was just telling Jeff this. It's already 35 minutes into the chat, and I'm struggling to keep it in time. But this is gonna go on. I think we're having another 45 minutes, so get ready, people. So I have two specific questions for you. One is, how did you hand over your baby to someone? How did you decide it was time to move away from you led sales to a COO led sales?
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of like two things. The first is I feel like we kind of figured out the playbook where it was sort of like we knew how to do it. It was semi repeatable. I first had other people like, so I actually was basically the sales manager. So I actually it's funny, he was still the COO and running other parts of the business. But I said, hey, I want you to be a salesperson and I want you to start taking,
Ah,
you know,
okay, okay,
25% of these calls as a rep.
okay.
We also had another couple people taking calls, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like coaching them and being their sales manager. And once I
Mm-hmm.
felt like everyone was able to close at a pretty high close rate. Yeah, and we have a very high close rate. You know, it's like 75%, so it's quite high. Once
Wow,
we get these
that's amazing.
conversations, and so once it was like, hey, we know how to close at a pretty high rate, I feel like I can delegate this. And
Gotcha.
then
Okay.
the other thing too was,
So
so
it
is
wasn't
that
really like
combined?
hiring a sales guy from scratch. Okay, so you had somebody. Okay,
No, yeah,
got you. This
exactly,
makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing too was that we realized that because our close rate was so high, that like really the bottleneck of the business wasn't converting and closing, it was getting new leads. And so as a
Mm-hmm.
CEO, I think your job essentially is to figure out where's the bottleneck to growth and
Yeah, of
then,
course.
you know, laser focus on that and unlock that. So that's why I had to move my focus.
Okay. Especially now that the market is, I mean, we all know it's a bit slower, it's a bit more difficult. Like compared
Yeah.
to a few years ago, like how do you feel the market sentiment is right now, and is there hope?
Yeah, I think there's definitely hope. The market sentiment is definitely sluggish. It still feels very sluggish, honestly. People are conservative. The buying's, you know, I think yeah, it's interesting. I think we're still finding growth and we're still going, but like people are very cautious to spend money, I think. And they're
Yeah.
also taking their existing expenditures and just giving it a lot more scrutiny. So I think before people would be like, "Oh, hey, you know, like we're not really getting value out of that, but we might in the future. So let's just keep it so we don't have to deal with the hassle of blah, 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 blah. But and now they would just keep it around and now they're
Yeah.
cutting. I
Yeah.
see that as a very big difference in the market. Even in our own team's behavior, like we have a lot of tools where it was like providing marginal value, or like I said, where it was like, hey, we might want to use this in the future when we kind of get our act together. Like we're not fully utilizing this, but we want to. And so it was like to the point we made about emotion. Like we had this emotion of like, FOMO. And so you would kind of keep tools around, but now you're just cutting them. And I think a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah, I think retention. It's funny. Like we started building Flowlaw from our own pain points, which is complex sales, and the first use case was closing and enterprise sales, and like building stakeholder alignment, all that. But now, for example, the last 3 4 months, it's been kind of hacked by customer success teams, especially using it for onboarding or retention, nurturing.
Interesting.
Like it's difficult to move through those multiple steps, stakeholders, everything is in one place, blah blah. It makes sense, like a mutual action plan or using it as a client portal. So for me, the way I observe that market sentiment is by trying to figure out where can we flow faster. So it's not just sticking to, okay,
Right.
this was the original plan, is for the sales guy. Yeah, I know, but now there's a CS person using it. So what do we build on it? So that's how we are not. I wouldn't say pivoting it, but I guess expanding our user base to see where the need is a bit more urgent or imminent, where we're going to sell faster, basically. Do you observe a similar thing with your product, or do you also feel the need to look for other places or figure out where you can sell faster?
Yeah, I think for us we actually had the opposite issue. Is like Grain initially started off as like a very horizontal
Everything.
tool,
Yeah, of course.
everything, because we started pre-pandemic. So we had like we kind of like got a lot of momentum during the first wave of things coming on Zoom, and so that was great. But it sort of like I think made us more horizontal. Like anyone can record their calls, but obviously what's happened over time is like there's been a lot of competition enter the market, and existing
Hmm.
competitors have grown and stuck around. And then on top of that, like the platforms themselves, like the Zoom and the Google Meet, have added a little bit of like call recording and transcribing functionality. So we actually kind of concluded that this sort of like very generalist, unopinionated call recording space was not some place we wanted to play. And so
Yeah,
we've actually
niche
like
down.
focused and narrowed our niche down more into
Hmm.
into sales specifically as like our as like the point of our spear. We still definitely have a similar thing as you, is where like it expands to customer success and product
Hmm.
managers and researchers,
Hmm.
and so those are still two critical personas for us. But we've
Yeah.
we've niched down and sort of said, hey, we're focusing on sales, customer success. Sales is the first primary, and then the secondary, sales and PM at sort of SMB to mid market
I
companies.
told you it makes sense. I guess
Yeah,
we came into contact at the point where you were contemplating these things a few months ago, and I'm
yeah,
glad
yeah.
you're moving in the tunnel towards light. Let's say.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope there's a light at the end of it.
I love that. So in this last section, I'm gonna give you a few like keywords, or I'm gonna do it very like rapid fire questiony type, and
Okay.
and I'm looking for like tips, tricks, best practices, strategies for anyone who might be in your shoes or who might be trying to go through a journey similar to yours, just to help them out with your wisdom, with your experience. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I would say, um, do you guys? Am I mistaken in saying that were you guys in YC at some point, or am I wrong?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Grain
Okay.
technically didn't go through YC, but I went through YC with that other company, Ping Pong, that merged with Grain.
Okay. So as someone who has that YC experience, and I know you share about that too, uh, is it still relevant YC this day and age? Like, is it really? How is the
I would
YC
say
experience?
I would say it's not essential, but it's fantastic. I
Mm.
typically still recommend. Obviously, each case is different, but I still recommend that if you get into YC, you should take a hard look at going. In fact, it's gotten a lot more founder friendly recently.
Hmm.
Their terms are fantastic. They give you an uncapped. They invest an uncapped $500,000 safe in every business, and that $500,000 uncapped safe as just like money in the bank, in addition to any other fundraising, is just really great because it guarantees you the opportunity to work on your business.
Okay.
That being
That
said, if
was
you're a
going to be my
second or
follow up.
third time, yeah, if you're like a second or third time founder, and you have existing fundraising relationships, and you can go raise a round on good terms, then maybe it might not make sense. But for first time founders to have access to the knowledge, the community, and then the money on such favorable terms, I think it makes a lot of sense in most cases.
All right. Great. As, now I don't know if this term serial entrepreneur or whatever is it something you like or not? People have different opinions on that. But again, like as somebody who has been through the journey a couple times, what would you say are your best tips and advice for someone becoming a first time founder?
Yeah, I'd say like my biggest personal learning has been, and I'm not just saying this because of the name of your podcast, but it has been to embrace sales. I think a lot of founders come into the experience as a product person, because usually it's the product insight that leads you to want to start the business. You're like, oh, I have this problem and I want to solve it with a product. And that's great. Your product insights are going to be key to building a big business, but you really need to embrace sales from day one. Don't see it as an afterthought. Don't see it as like this dirty thing, that like commercial thing that like me as a smart engineer or brilliant product person don't need to get my hands dirty with that. It's like, see it as like an essential thing to figure out if you're wasting your time or not. Like, I mean, I literally, like, if I were to do a business I would put together a pitch deck without any other product, and I would just start to sell from day one.
Wow, I love that. It touches me very deeply. So the thing is, in our co-founder group, we're quite lucky that we have the builder, the tech guy, and the
You've got
hustler who is me. Yeah, we got
nice.
the perfect trio. But yeah, Oz, especially my technical co-founder, he should listen to this. I think now, as he's been building a sales tool for 2 years, and I think now he understands sales is not a dirty word anymore.
Right.
I
That's
love
good.
that. Okay. What about founder-led sales versus, sales expert-led sales, or someone else-led sales? Like, at what point do you hand it over after you check which boxes?
Yeah, so this is where I have battle scars. I mean, obviously everyone's experience is going to be different, but we actually hired people to, like, sales experts. We hired very experienced salespeople from Zoom, which was like an adjacent space. We assumed a
Yeah.
very relevant experience. High performer there did not work. I think, to me, there's a difference between people who are really good at the craft of selling versus really good at figuring out the sales process
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the motion at a high level. I think so. Again, like, I feel bad in hindsight. We kind of threw this person to the wolves because we had no idea. We're like, hey, go figure out how to sell. And it just didn't work at all. It wasn't until we figured out, and part of it is like we were setting this person up for failure because,
Mm,
like, outbound doesn't work in our segment. Even inbound selling wasn't really working. So he was just trying kind of things, but even then, like, he was very slow to iterate because he knew his
mm.
playbook. So he would, like, run his playbook. He ran it for 3 or 4 months. It didn't work at all. And then we're like, oh, hey, maybe you should try something else. Whereas, like, I think a founder, I'm not saying salespeople can't be like this, but I think, like, the founding skill set, I think, is to get very early signals and then make pretty, like, good judgments off those signals so that you can iterate quickly rather than, like,
I think
run.
they have a pretty amazing title for that, founding AE, which I see more and more. Do you think that makes sense?
No, because
That kind of person.
we did that title. We did that title.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Tell
yeah.
me.
I think that works if the AE has been a founder and was a good
Okay.
founder. I don't think you can take an AE and then say, and again, this is different for everyone. There might be, there
Yeah, of
might be a
course.
lot of AEs out there who have that kind of, that iterative, generative problem solving ability. But I would just be careful. Like,
Yeah.
being a great AE at an established company does not translate into early stage builder of the sales process, even if you call it a founding AE and frame it that. We framed it very much that way. Like, we want to give you a founding AE, have you build our sales process. And in hindsight, maybe if I'd managed it more closely, maybe it could have worked a little bit better.
I
But
think I'm not sure about that. I think it's an intention thing because I think both parties go. So you go into the conversation saying like, okay, I'm going to bring this person with their expertise, and also I'm tired. I want to hand over a little bit this tiring thing, and then person is coming like, this is an adventure. I'm going to be successful. Like good
yeah.
intentions on both sides, but then in the day to day, the grind, it's hard. You try 55 times and it's still not working. Then it's difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, and part of the reason why I really think the founder or the CEO has to be the person to figure out the motion is because our motion involves, we have, like, for example, like, product triggers. We like when people do certain things in the product, we say, hey, would you like to learn more by talking to Grain? And,
Yeah.
like, so it's like a combo of, like, product. We use a lot of lifecycle email marketing to sort of entice people.
Bring
Like I
them
said, we do
back. Yeah.
a sales assist motion, and so a
Yeah.
lot of it is like sales is a way to like talk to someone to get additional information about the product. And so the actual motion that's worked with us has been like 15, 20 product changes, a bunch of changes to lifecycle marketing, a bunch of changes to pricing, a bunch of changes to business model. And then once all those like puzzle pieces are locked in place, it starts working. But like a salesperson can't come in and they don't have the
No.
organizational power or the insight to like make all those puzzle pieces that are outside of their expertise align. So a founder has to do that. A founder has to get that working. And then once it's like, okay, the puzzle is together, now here, go and like, go and, swim in your lane and build it. So
Mm.
that's why it has been unsuccessful for us. But now I think now it's working after, I took the time to actually, go through and make it work. But it was
Yeah. I
long and
think.
painful. And so it's always tempting to just kind of like offload it earlier.
Yeah. I mean, we all want to avoid the pain, but I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the times I've done it, and then each time I said, "Oh, I'm going to hand this over," and then I figured, like, no, as the founder, it
Yeah.
stops with you. Like, you have to figure it out, unfortunately or fortunately.
Right.
Oh God, this is such a great conversation, and I've done really terrible job of keeping us to time. But just even this makes me think like we should have a PLG versus sales assisted versus sales led or whatever conversation, which I think is a very exciting topic to talk about. And now that I'm becoming a bit more of a product person, not just a sales and marketing, and I know a little bit more about those things, and what you just said at the end makes a lot of sense, like the triggers, the behaviors. Like a salesperson cannot be expected to, build all that motion, especially in a
Yeah.
product like yours
Exactly.
or mine. Love
Totally.
that. So, Jeff, have I forgotten to ask you anything that I should have?
No, I think this has been awesome conversations. Happy to, come back and explore other any cul-de-sac we didn't fully go down, but it's been awesome.
There's too many. There's too many,
Yeah.
and it would be an absolute pleasure. It's really great fun to talk with you. I love that how you're building something really exciting. You share it very humbly. And I think that's a very important trait because there's a bit of a founder cult, I think, where people associate being a founder with a bit. You have to be a bit of a cool slash asshole type. I don't know if that registers with you. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's like the big founders who made it. You have to have that type. But the people I speak to are very nice and not assholes at all. So I'm wondering if they're gonna make it, not
I
being
know.
assholes in this world.
Sometimes I wonder, do I need to be a bit more? But yeah, no, I don't know. We'll see. I feel like we're gonna make it, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Yes, we're going to make it in our own terms. This has been a
Yes.
great conversation, Jeff. That's going to be a wrap on this episode of Sales Therapy. Thank you very much for being with us and sharing your wisdom with our audience today. And, yeah, if you enjoy the show, follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And any last words from you, Jeff?
Go out there and build and sell. Let's do this. We got it.
Yeah, and if
You can
one
make it
fold,
without being a jerk.
yes, you can make it without being a jerk. I think and hope so. I actually raised this question in a founders group of 100, and we were contemplating a few names, like who are the people who'd made it without being a jerk? And there were like 10, 15 good names that came out. So I think it's possible. Anyway,
Awesome.
thanks again, and until next time, thanks for listening to Sales Therapy. Bye-bye.
Bye.